Does that actually map out the points in your body that need the treatment? Kind of like a
It does.
roadmap for the acupuncturist?
It does. Although we've got another device that we've had for a while that's been really well proven. I mean, because you can go to the hardware store and get an ohm meter to measure resistance, and you can trace the acupuncture channels because they're the area of maximum energy flow and the least resistance. And so if you get a point where the resistance is higher, we have a little different device that we check like 12 different points on the body, and it'll give us a printout. Hi, and welcome to The Balancing Point. I'm Dr. John Nieters, and I'm here to make traditional Chinese medicine, functional medicine, and integrative health simple, practical, and fun, so you can restore balance, boost vitality, and enjoy a healthier life every single day.
Welcome, everybody, to A World of Possibilities, an educational podcast. I'm Phil Cisneros, your host for A World of Possibilities, and I have the honor of having with me today to interview and a longtime friend as well. So I really am, like I said, honored to have him here, Dr. John Nieters of Alameda Acupuncture in Alameda, California. So welcome, John.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. As you said, we go pretty far back. You're actually the person that inspired me to start doing talk radio. And I don't know how long that's been, but it was a long time ago. And I was on the air for about 10 years and loved every minute of it, getting calls from all over the world, people asking questions, right? And it actually changed a lot about how I set up my day. And so I would get up, and from 4 to 5 in the morning, I'd research, because there were a couple people that would call every week. And I swear, Phil, all week they studied to find a question to play Stump the Acupuncturist. So I always had to stay a couple steps ahead of them, right?
That's great. And I want you to know, when I first worked with John, Dr. Nieters, I'm going to say Dr. Nieters because of he deserves that title. Really, you do, given your research and all the things that you've done. I first found him in the back of a chiropractor's office, and everything in his office was impeccable, and he was like a bright light shining. When I walked into his office, I went, wow, this guy needs to be out in the world. You know, here he is in the back of a chiropractor's office, and it's a small office that he had. And he needs to get out there, and it's exactly what happened. And as a result, he expanded and became a very well, in fact, is still known and very well known acupuncturist in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And as a result of that, are you still doing talks with the Commonwealth?
I haven't done any since the pandemic.
Okay.
I did one just before the pandemic that I thought was one of my worst talks, Phil. I came out, and one of my students was there, and they said, "So how was it?" And I said, "I was really mediocre." And, I usually do pretty good talks, but I said, I was really mediocre. And she goes, "Oh, don't be humble." And my wife goes, "He isn't being humble. It was mediocre." Well, that talk, 2 weeks later, I got a patient from Indonesia and one from Costa Rica on the same day, and 7 people called to schedule appointments. I've never had anything like. I don't do those talks to get patients, really. I just love doing it. But the talk just hooked them. And it was a great learning experience for me, because a lot of times when I do talks, like at the Commonwealth Club, at one time I had the record over there. I probably don't anymore, but I do a talk on diabetes, for example. And I'd always kind of start with the Western idea of, this is what's happening, and then kind of go more naturopathic. And at the end, I throw in a quick thing about acupuncture. Well, the talk that I did the last time at the Commonwealth Club was electroacupuncture for neurological conditions. And I knew that they wouldn't know much about acupuncture. So I went into the history of acupuncture, pointed out that Utsi, the Iceman that was, pulled out of the Alps after being buried for 6,000 years, actually had the acupuncture meridians tattooed on his body. I took my son back to the Smithsonian, and we saw the exhibit, and where they talked about, bringing doctors and acupuncturists in, and sure enough, and the very conditions that that they would have been treating him for, those were the points that were highlighted. So who knows how far back this really goes, right?
Yes.
But I had to go through all the theory and what's known about acupuncture and electroacupuncture. And electroacupuncture is a fascinating story, what people have come up with, how different frequencies of electroacupuncture will stimulate the release of different neurotransmitters. So if I want to treat someone by activating their opioid system, I do 2 to 4 hertz. If I want to activate their dynorphin system, which is a different pain relief system, I do 100 hertz. And so we're using the same points we would use in acupuncture, but once we got that frequency stuff down, it made just a
Yeah.
world of difference. So anyway, I talked about that and people started showing up. So
Yeah. Well, that's a great thing about Dr. Nieters. He's a great storyteller for all you listeners out there. And I would recommend you find his your podcast called The Balancing Point.
yep, yep.
Yep. And really he's got some great stories, factual information that would benefit you. And we're going to get into that, as well as I want to have people know your background, Dr.
Okay.
Nieters. So let's talk a little bit about what got you started in acupuncture and how this all came about. So,
Yeah.
here's the great thing. His wife, Jenny, is also an acupuncturist and is an acupuncturist for the San Francisco 49ers, as well as the, was it St. Mary's College?
At St. Mary's rugby team, we double checked, and during January, they had her travel with the team. They don't always do that, but for the big games they did, and she had 2 days off in January. So she's still recovering.
Oh, I
So,
can
yeah,
imagine.
and she's getting ready to go to Barcelona to teach a bunch of doctors over there about acupuncture. So she stays pretty darn busy, right?
She's come a long way. She used to just be the office manager for
Yeah.
Alameda Acupuncture.
And, Phil, I was the president of the Oakland Acupuncture School, the Academy of Chinese Culture. My mentor had been the president, and before he died, he asked me if I would take over, and I tried to get out of it for 2 or 3 years, and finally he passed away, and I felt kind of obligated and honor bound to take it over. Well, I was there one Sunday doing a talk about acupuncture. It was an open house. And, I'm telling stories and getting people interested and going through some figures about what's possible with acupuncture practices. She raises her hand and says, "How do I sign up?" She said, "All these years I've been sitting in the back room handling all the bookkeeping. I want to get out there and have fun too." So that's how she got involved in acupuncture, actually. And it was interesting because she was planning. One of my degrees is in gynecological endocrinology, which, I do endocrine function, and it was centered at that point around women. And she'd always wanted to be a gynecologist. So that's what she thought she was going to do, that she was going to work side by side with me. Well, I think it was the last thing I did as a president, I insisted that they start upping their game in terms of continuing education. And we had this one guy coming in who's an expert in sports medicine. He started out at the 1980 Olympics, right, treating sports medicine. And I said, "You got to come see this guy, Jenny. This guy has stuff that is so simple and clear." He'll even say, "Look, 95% of what I see with shoulder injuries is one of these 4 things. So I'm going to teach you those 4 things so that you can go out on Monday and be able to do it. The other 5%, go learn some other way." You just don't see it enough to take up a full class with. So she came, was so impressed, she became the West Coast liaison for him, became an assistant to him, and I think she's probably done about 50 of his classes, and she now teaches that class. So it was kind of a roundabout way, but she really, really got there, which is really cool. So Phil, when I was like president of the school and I was, the big honcho doing radio show and stuff, my son, of course, always loved his mom, but I was kind of the cool guy. Well, now that she's with the 49ers
Yeah.
and sometimes he gets to go on house calls, I'm no longer the cool guy.
Right. Right.
His mom is it.
Out of the way, Dad.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And his friends go, "You really go meet the 49ers?" And he, "Of course I do." So
I go with
that's
mom.
been fun.
Yeah, my mom, she's great.
Yeah. And
Well,
then back to how I got here. I got here the way most people my age did. We had problems, medical problems, that Western medicine was not fixing. And so I tried everything pretty much until I found acupuncture. And so I went down to Santa Barbara. I'd been a high school athlete, played 4 sports, 2 of them badly and 2 of them pretty well. And I went down to Santa Barbara and became a couch potato. Basically ate potato chips and drank beer for several months, right? And then I got up with some friends and had a rousing game of ping pong, literally ping pong.
hmm,
I blew out a disc in my back, right? I sat down in a chair, could not get up. They actually had to carry me to the car, take me to student health. And he said, well, we can't do imaging, but I'm sure it's a blown disc. And he gave me someone to get a second opinion from. So I went in, he said, oh yeah, you got a totally blown disc and you got some damage on another one. You have to have surgery or you won't be able to walk in a few years. And I said, oh, okay, I guess that's the way it is. And so I came home, and most of my friends really were jocks. We played a lot of poker, did a lot of gambling, and played a lot of sports. But I had one friend who just didn't really fit. And his name was Stuart McClay. And Stuart was the president of the chess club, the president of the physics club, right? He was just a brainiac. And so one day, I don't know why we got along so well, but so one day we're sitting on the floor in his house and I told him I needed surgery. And he said, huh, why don't you try acupuncture? And this is the early 70s, right? I said, what the heck is acupuncture? And he said, remember the Kung Fu TV show where they stick little needles in people? I said, are you nuts? Someone stick needles in me? And he said, in a very calm manner, oh, I see. So you're going to let a surgeon take a scalpel and carve up your spine. I said, huh, maybe I'll try that acupuncture stuff. So I went to a brilliant herbalist and martial artist in Berkeley, actually Albany at that time. And he talked to me for a while and he said, you don't need surgery. This will heal. You just have to. And he gave me a whole dietary plan, told me all the things to leave out, all the things to do. He said, and I want you to start doing my Tai Chi and Qigong classes because that will train you to move properly and build more core strength because you've gotten lazy and you lost all your core strength. And then, Phil, at the very end, in this very strong accent, he said, and one more thing, no sex, even with yourself, for 6 months. That's like, whoa, right? And so I was a good boy. I followed all of his instructions, and knock on wood, I'm 74. I have 0 back pain, none. And I
wow.
have friends and people that I know that got surgery at that time. And of course, the surgical techniques weren't as good as they are now, and they can barely move. They can barely function. So thanks to Stuart McClay. So that got my interest, and I started studying Tai Chi and Qigong. I wasn't a very good student at that point, but he was also a brilliant herbalist, so I started studying herbal medicine, and that was around 72 or 73, 1972,
Right.
1973.
Mhm.
And so I did that, and then a few years later, I was driving down Telegraph Avenue, and there was a martial arts studio with huge windows so you could see what they were doing, and they were doing weird stuff. I had never seen anything like this, so I was fascinated. Turns out they were doing Xingyi and Bagua, which are other internal martial arts, but it intrigued me because on the sign it said Peter Ralston, World Martial Arts Champion, 1978. At that time, there was one world tournament. Now there's a world tournament every weekend on TV, right? But at
Right.
that time, that really meant something. So he went to China, beat whole teams of people over there, and then came back to teach because he wanted to show people the power of contemplation and of controlling, being present, I'll say. And so that's mostly what he taught. Now, I studied with him for over 10 years, did a lot of martial arts, started teaching a lot of his classes, but we would do some really intense contemplation, 4-day every few months, and then a 13-day once or twice a year. And it was just magnificent. And I have to tell you, I never once hit Peter. I would box with him several times a week. I would do private lessons. And if he didn't want me to, I could not hit him, and neither could anybody else. And
Wow.
in fact, in several of his fights when he was in China, the first guy was a Korean guy. And what I heard was that the guy watched Peter in the ring, and Peter wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there. And he
Right.
said, I'm not going to get in the ring with him. He'll kill me. Right. I know this guy been training his whole life, but he wouldn't fight. And so in the next 3 fights, nobody touched him. Finally, the last guy hit him a couple times. And then Peter won. It was actually fairly close. But he wanted to teach the power of contemplation and
Uh-huh.
of Tai Chi. So that got my interest. I did that. But then along the way, I started getting these really severe gut pains. I mean, literally, I'd be walking down the street and it felt like someone stuck a hot poker into my gut.
Uh-huh.
And I would just fall to the ground. And so I went to the doctor. They didn't do much. Then I was playing poker for a living at that time. And this is a little bit before Peter, but I was playing poker for a living at that time. And I was up in Reno. And my dad came to visit me. It was the only time he ever came to visit me up there. And suddenly I started going into anaphylaxis. He rushed me to the hospital. They said 10 minutes later, I probably would have died.
Wow.
So I go to a GI doctor down here several times. Again, it was quite a while ago, so they didn't have as sophisticated a testing procedure as they do now. But after a while, he said, okay, we're going to do surgery. And I said, oh, good. You know what's wrong. That's great. And he said, well, no, not really. It's exploratory. We think you could have a tumor in your small intestine. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go back to my Chinese acupuncturist and see what he says. And the doc said, okay, if you want to kill yourself, do that. Right. So I went back to this guy and he said, you can never eat wheat again. Now, you got to understand, this was not after the wheat craze
Right.
started, right? But going back in Chinese medicine to the 1200s, there were doctors that said, for some people, you can't eat wheat. It wasn't a blanket thing, but they said for some people, you just can't eat it. And so I stopped eating wheat. He also told me I had to stay out of the casinos. He said the off-gassing, they replace the carpets and the furniture all the time. And he
Right.
said they don't allow enough fresh air in, and so that's poisoning you. So I followed his instructions. I stopped eating wheat. I stayed out of the casinos. All my symptoms went away, and to this day, they've never come back. That kind of convinced me by then that there was something to this. But the thing that really, really threw me over the edge. Now, I had wanted to go back to acupuncture
Right.
school, but I owned a real estate company. I had a wife and 3 kids, and it just wasn't a real practical thing to do at that point. But then my dad called and said he wasn't feeling too well. He was going to the doctor, and would I come back and go with him? Now, that's a strange request from my dad. And so I went back. I was broke. I had to take the Greyhound, which actually turned out to be a fun ride. But
Okay.
so I get to his house. He can't even get out of the chair, basically. I had to help him out of his chair. And we go to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, Herman, you have throat cancer, and it's starting to spread up into your brain. And he said, so how long have you been smoking? My dad said, I don't smoke. He said, well, I've never seen this type of cancer in someone that doesn't smoke. And I said, Pops, I started going to the store and getting you Copenhagen snuff when I was about 8 years old. You've been chewing your whole life. And the doctor said, yep, that's exactly where that would fall, is right where the cancer is. So I drove him back out here. Oh, you'll like this. It was McCluskey, North Dakota.
Wow.
About 200 people in this town. And so while he was gone, I'd learned to play, a little bit of guitar, enough to sing with it. And so I took my guitar back. And so I was playing my guitar out in the yard, and he lived right on the edge of town one night. And so the next day I'm walking through town, and it's about a maybe 2 block long, maybe a block long business district. And this woman who looked like she was at least 80 years old stepped right in front of me, said, now, who are you? And I said, I'm John Nieters. I'm Herman's son. She said, I thought you might be, and I heard you sing real well, right? But then when people in the town found out about it, we started basically having hootenannies every night. People would come over and we were singing everything. And within 2 weeks, and I started feeding my dad better, but within 2 weeks, he was up dancing.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing. So I drove him out here. Now, I wasn't licensed at this point, so I took him to the school that I later became president of, took him in, and they made up the foulest smelling decoctions you can ever imagine. We couldn't even go in our house for an hour after we cooked these herbs for him, but he took them, felt really good. My sister took him up to his Army reunion in Oregon and then drove him back to North Dakota. He went in to see the doctor. They did some imaging and he said, Herman, this is amazing. Your tumor has reduced by over 50%. And so my dad told him what he's doing. And the doc said, well, that wouldn't make any difference, but you need the surgery anyway. And he died from the surgery. Right.
Oh,
So
no.
that was the thing that just
Uh,
flipped me. It's like,
yeah.
I didn't have the authority and I didn't have the knowledge to really talk to him about it in a way that he could hear. So that's what really got me going in terms of deciding to go back and study traditional Chinese medicine.
And you went to China, didn't you go there to study
Yeah, I've
for a
been there a
while?
couple times. I
Yeah.
went in the 90s, which was someday over a beer, I'll tell you a couple hours of stories. Because
Okay.
at that point,
I would love it.
I was followed everywhere, everywhere. I couldn't go into the hotel room with somebody unless I kept the door open. I mean, it was a very interesting time. And then that was in my master's program. And then in my doctoral program, I went over and I was a member of the cohort that did the first integrative diabetes protocol. And they treat diabetes so much more effectively than we do in the US. It is astonishing. So I was a member of the American Diabetes Association. I get all the journals, and very rarely do they ever use the word cure. They always say control. We got
Yes.
to control the diabetes. In China, they say cure, right? You're property of the state, and we're not going to
Yeah.
spend money on you. You have to get better.
We need you to
And
work.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And the things that they do are so dramatically different than what's done here. So yeah, that was quite an experience. It was awesome. A lot of people got homesick because we were there for several weeks, over a month. And but I took my son Johnny and my wife with me. And so what they would do is there was a podcast coming out of Shanghai and they would listen to that every morning. And every day it was a different topic, like, let's go to the supermarket or let's go to the silk market or whatever. And then they would go do that, whatever that was in the podcast. And by the time we left, my son could do a pretty good job of ordering food and things. And my wife can still hold conversations just from that short time. So it was great. We had a great time. It's quite fascinating when you get there. Like I was in a gynecology program. And so I've done a lot of fertility work, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and et cetera. And it takes 6 to 7 months to get to in the United States, they literally do it in 1/2 day.
Wow.
1/2 day. All the testing, all the diagnostics. You go in the morning, you see a doctor in the morning without an appointment because they keep churning out more doctors. Where here we've got this choke point, and as the population grows, the number of doctors isn't growing to keep up with it. Over there, they just turn out more doctors. They open new universities. And so they are so much more efficient. Now, there are a lot of things that we do better. If you
Right.
got really serious illness, you need heroic medicine. But in terms of diagnostics, efficiency, and cost, they're light years ahead of us. So
Yeah.
it was a
I've
great
seen I've seen a video of somebody who was over there getting medicine at a hospital, and it's all automated, and you don't have. I think the whole time it took for them to give her the prescription, go to the machine, and then have the dispensary dispense the prescription was 17.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. Well, I
that's
went over and I had some time off one day, and I just for the heck of it, I went down and went to the doctor and I said, "Hey, can I get ultrasounds done?" And he said, "Sure." And he wrote up the order. I walked down the hall. I had about a 10-minute wait, uh, right? No appointment. And this PhD MD with 20 years of experience did 9 ultrasounds on me, my carotid arteries, my femoral arteries, my liver, you name it, my kidneys. And it was $27. And she wrote the report while I was there through a translator. She didn't speak very good English, but $27. So, Phil, I come home, I go to see my doctor, and I tell her, "Hey, I've got kidney stones. I've got 2 really big kidney stones." And she said, "How do you know?" I said, "Well, when I was in China, I got an ultrasound." And she said, "We don't trust anything they do from China." And I said, "Okay, I'm peeing blood and I'm having horrible pain." And she said, "Are you?" I said, "That's what you're gonna put in your notes when you
Yeah.
order my
Yeah.
ultrasound,
Yeah.
right?"
Really. Yeah.
Yeah. So she orders the ultrasound. It takes 6 weeks to get the ultrasound. It was done by a tech who not that good a tech really, but they found exactly what they found in China, but I think it was 7 or $800. So
Wow.
that's what we're seeing in terms of scale, right?
Right.
So,
Right. Well, it's really great because I remember when you had opened up your office in Alameda, and you were also on the board at the Chinese School of Herbal Medicine and Acupuncture in Oakland there.
right?
And you had really gained a reputation through several subject matters that you were treating at the Alameda Acupuncture. You want to talk a little bit about that and anything that's evolved from that?
Well, as you know, Phil, I used to change careers frequently. I did remodeling, and then I was a professional poker player, and then I had real estate companies, and then a real estate training company. I was a general contractor along the way because I'm always wanting to learn new stuff. But it turns out I like what I'm doing so much. I've been doing it for almost 30 years now,
Yeah.
but I have to change my focus so that I go out and learn more new stuff. Like first 10 years, I did mostly gut problems, right? Digestive problems of different kinds. And then I got my doctorate in gynecological endocrinology, started treating a ton of fertility patients, a lot, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, etc. And we still treat those, but one of the things that I'm treating a lot of now are vaccine and COVID, long COVID injuries.
Mm.
And we treat a lot of those. POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And, we're seeing still huge amounts of diabetes and cardiovascular problems. So we treat a little bit of that. Well, we treat a lot of everything, actually. Still, my favorite is gynecology. We treat a lot of stroke victims. It has been a
Mm.
bad few years for stroke, and we get actually really, really good results. So we're doing right. And it's interesting. There are 2 very famous doctors from China that are the stroke specialists. One guy named Shi Min, and I apologize for my poor ability to speak Chinese, but he had the largest stroke hospital in all the world. He was this, I don't know what his title was, but chairman something, but he's the one who created all of the stroke protocols for China. Now, I had to hear this number 4 or 5 times before it really sunk in. His hospital treated 10,000 stroke patients a day.
A
A day,
day?
Phil, a day. Because what they do in China, they'll have regional hospitals. So in a particular region, one of the hospitals will treat mostly liver problems. Another will treat mostly cardiovascular. Well, his hospital treated neurological problems and primarily stroke. And I got to study with him here. And fortunately, at that time, I didn't know how famous he was because it would have scared the crap out of me working in his clinic with him, right? But I did work with him here. And then there's another fellow named Zhao Shunfa, and Zhao Shunfa created the scalp acupuncture system, which is now standard in Chinese medical textbooks. Well, there are very few things that change in Chinese medicine, but this is the most recent one. And so he looked at the neurology, he looked at the brain and said, and came up with a totally new system. Now, I had studied with both of those people, but nobody came to see me for stroke because they didn't think about it. With the pandemic, people were really desperate. We were open, and they would, it's easier to find information now. They'd plug in stroke and they'd see my name. And so we are treating a lot of stroke patients and a lot of other neurological problems.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
incredible. That's really great. And then, of course, you've expanded with the sports medicine or sports acupuncture with Jenny, and then she's
Yeah, it's funny.
part of
Don't
your
tell
team.
anybody, Phil. But Jenny and I work brilliantly in parallel, but not so good in series. Like, we don't go shopping together
Oh
because her
God,
pace is completely different
right?
than mine. And
Yeah,
so it works so perfectly. We have she and some other acupuncturists that basically just do sports medicine. I mean, the other acupuncturists will treat, you know, headaches and migraines and things like that also, but it's mostly sports medicine. And then Catherine Black and Catherine's co-author with a couple of my books, we will actually work together with new patients. And so I've got the system so it works for me a lot better than it used to. We'll see new patients 1 day a week to keep, because it's hard when you've got new patients and returning patients kind of overlapping, because I
hmm
never know how much care or time the new patients are going to need. And we allow 2.5 hours actually for a new patient. And Catherine's here with me. She scribes, takes all the notes, and then I create a treatment plan. Well, then when they return, I have someone else doing the scribing, and then Catherine does the acupuncture. So I pretty much sit behind my desk, and it works really well. It's such a trip, Phil. My patients will often tell me things they don't tell their therapists. And I know
uh
that because I've had therapists refer people to me, and I'll say things like, well, that childhood trauma when she was 7, that had to really make a difference. She goes, she had trauma at 7? She never told me that. Right. And so it's very interesting. But then they'll go in with Catherine, and she'll spend more time with them while she's needling them and checking out their energy flow. And they tell her things completely different than what they tell me,
yes,
right? They tell me about their condition and their history, and they tell her about their family and their relationships and stuff. So it's really great. We get a really broad picture of it.
yeah. It's the one thing I've experienced, and just so I let the listeners know that I have been to Alameda Acupuncture and had treatment because I wanted to be a part of it and see what was the experience there, and the if you want to call it bedside manner, I think that's a good term, or context in which you serve your clientele is that you become personable. You're connected, you're related, present. You're present with them. And I think that's a really great characteristic to have in an acupuncture practice, that you're actually being present with the person before you even do the treatment.
Right.
And I think that's just really great.
You know, when my wife was doing her doctoral program, a lot of her classes were on Mondays, and Monday's my day off. So I would listen. And she had a couple of great teachers. And this one teacher was practicing at the Osher Center at Harvard, right? And so they were doing a lot of integrated medicine. But he came in one time and he's telling about a study they did, and they would put electroencephalographs on the doctor and on the patient. Now, obviously, you can't double blind that, but they didn't tell them what they were doing. And so they
Okay.
just went through their normal protocol, and they did it long enough that the doctors kind of forgot it was there. And then they compared the results. And so they were looking, and when the patient and the doctor got entrainment, when their brain waves started to match a rapport, when they got in rapport, they got results twice as fast as the doctors that didn't get rapport. So
Right.
we know bedside manner is important, but
Right.
you can look at the science and it tells you it might be more important than we even thought.
Right. Right. Because that connection is what allows for relaxation, ease,
And
and clean up. Yeah.
yeah, they're also more willing to follow my instructions, right?
Yep.
It's
Yep.
like, yeah. So it's like, oh, I trust you. I'll do that. Yeah.
That's great. And then in that the expansion of Alameda, you of course you have the one office, and you've expanded your staff. Now, I've known you since what, the early 2000s of
Yeah.
2003, 2004, and we both of us have aged, right? And, we've gone through a lot and et cetera. So anything you want to say about it, that in your career, in your profession, in your commitment to acupuncture, health, well-being of people, what have you noticed as we've aged since that time when I found you in the back of a chiropractor's office?
I have hopefully gained a little more insight and wisdom, but I don't think quite as quickly as I used to. Someone asked me, "You think you'll ever go out and play poker again?" I said, "No." You know, your thought process is slow down a little bit, even if you're really, really healthy and you keep your brain up. And those split second, instantaneous calculation of the odds gets harder when you get older. And, so things do slow down a little bit. I keep adding to my repertoire, and I keep adding to what we do to add value. And be honest, Phil, I like gadgets. I really do. Like we've got one called an oligo scan that was predicted in the 30s by a very, very famous doctor. And he said you should be able to tell the mineral and vitamin content in people's bodies by doing a scan. He said we don't have the equipment now, but it's just like a spectroscope, right? You can tell what something's made of by putting it through the spectroscope because it gives off different wavelengths and the wavelengths of light. So we have one that we just do people's palms, and it gives us a readout on their heavy metals, on their other minerals that we want them to have, calcium, potassium, etc., and their vitamins. It's about 8 vitamins that it will test for. And so it's really pretty trippy. The trippiest thing, though, is the highest mercury level we have ever found was on me.
Wow.
Right? I grew up with a mouthful of fillings. I used to go fishing with my dad out on our boat in the Carquinez Straits, and those striped bass were full of mercury. So I accumulated a lot of mercury. So
Wow.
I'm still working to get it out, right? To gently chelate it out. So that's fun. We've got another new device that Catherine bought that's basically using the principle of Kirlian photography, which the Russians
Right.
were big on in the 60s and 70s. But this Dr. Korotkov has created these AI programs that would trip you out, Phil. It will, it's been pretty well proven that every organ in the body has a different ideal voltage. Like the voltage of the energy through the heart is a little different than the voltage in the liver. And if you can balance that out, it sounds really woo-woo, but the science is pretty solid for it. There's a guy named Jerry Tennant who wrote a book called Healing is Voltage, and there's a good research. And then, this is crazy, it will map out the health of your chakra system, and then it will map out your acupuncture meridians and give you whether they're high, low, or imbalanced. I have no way to prove whether it works or not, except that it almost matches 100% with what I would expect to find. So
Wow.
anyway, we just got that, and we're just playing around with it. In fact, we offered it free to anybody who has an appointment in the month of March. It's my birthday, and I always like to give something away on
Yeah.
my birthday, right? Last couple of years, we gave away free labs, but this time we're giving this away. But it also gives us a chance to kind of get familiar with it and build up a little database for it. So
Right.
that's
So does that actually map out the points in your body that need the treatment, kind of like a
it does.
roadmap for the acupuncturist?
It does. Although we've got another device that we've had for a while that's been really well proven. I mean, because what we're looking, you can go to the hardware store and get an ohm meter to measure resistance, and you can trace the acupuncture channels because they're the area of maximum energy flow and the least resistance. And so if you get a point where the resistance is higher, we have a little different device that we check like 12 different points on the body, and it'll give us a printout. It'll even give suggestions for herbal stuff, although they're pretty simplistic, so we don't use them. But sometimes the acupuncture points are very fascinating. I might have thought a 9 of 10 of them, but sometimes that 10th point is quite fascinating, and we get really great results. And so by taking all of those things, and we don't do all of them on everybody. There's some people I would never begin to tell we were gonna test their chakra system, right?
Yeah.
They'd walk out. But then by pairing that with functional medicine, that's what really made a huge difference for me. I got dragged kicking and screaming, I think 1999, to a class. This person I knew that I was a study partner for me for the state board exam said, "Will you please go with me?" And I said, "Oh, God, okay." And it was on leaky gut. Well, in
Right.
1999, if you said leaky gut around a doctor, they would call you a lunatic. And now, it's used, the term's used all the time because it's true. Now they have specific tests that can prove very quickly and very accurately if your gut is actually leaking. And so, um, so I went to this class, and within about 2 hours, Phil, my tail was wagging. I was so excited, right? It's like someone put a treat out there and said, "Come
Right.
on, John." When I got the magnificence of being able to pair traditional Chinese medicine with brilliant Western lab testing, a lot of just standard tests, but a lot of them that doctors weren't running, advanced stool tests, tests for your different ways of testing for hormones and things. And what I loved about them is they were both individual person centered. It
Right.
wasn't about some, statistical anomaly. It was you, Phil Cisneros. What needs to be done with you? And so they both were coming at it to the same endpoint, but from different directions. There are some things that from functional medicine that are just brilliant to understand. Like I would know that someone had intestinal dysbiosis or gut problems, but now you can tell which of the thousands of microbiome bacteria is out of whack, right? And so it's like that's kind of cheating, right? But I'll
Right.
take it. And so then you pair that with traditional Chinese medicine, particularly with pulse and tongue diagnosis, which MDs get blown away. I was interviewed a few weeks ago by a very bright MD, and he kept asking me about pulse diagnosis. And then at the end, he said, "Can you send me some names? I want to study that." And so he did. He found this pulse diagnosis teacher and went off to study because he said, "I can use that in my clinic." Right. So
That's great.
to me, it's a perfect marriage.
Yeah. It's, I'll tell a story of when you and I used to meet, and I went over your house before we'd go over you always took me to a great Chinese restaurant in Berkeley. I can't remember the
Mm.
name of it, but before we went, he said, "Well, we're going to go and have lunch over at the restaurant." And prior to going there in a couple of days, my stomach had been really weird. And every time I ate something, I had a pain in my stomach, and I just couldn't figure it out. I tried, the typical over-the-counter Pepto-Bismol and Tums, the weird stuff that we shouldn't be doing. But that's all I had access to, you know. And so when I shared with you that, and I said, "Ah, I don't think we should go. You can go ahead and eat, and I'll be with you, and we'll talk." And you said, "Well, would you mind if I fixed you up a little Chinese herbal medicine for it?" You had the herbs right there in your house. And I said, "Sure, sure, I'm game. Anything to get rid of this, you know?" And so you did, and it was a tea, and you had me drink it. And he says, "Okay, we'll go ahead and go have lunch." That's what you told me. And I said, Yeah, I don't, how do you know this is going to work that quick? And he goes, "Don't worry about it. Just eat. You'll be fine." That's what you told me. I remember. And then we got to the Chinese restaurant and had great Chinese food, and there was my stomach didn't act up at all. It was no pain, and I went, "Fantastic. This is really great." And so we had a good lunch, and then we went to a used bookstore afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember this distinctly. I tell you, John has made an incredible impression in my life. Dr. Nieters here. And we went to the bookstore, and I don't know if you know this about me, but if I go into a bookstore or a library, it's automatic. I can have anything flushed out of my body. It just acts as a natural relaxer. I don't know what it is, but I was looking through some books and I went, "Oh, I got to go to use the restroom," so I took off at the restroom, and boy, did that took care of whatever was in my stomach. It was gone, and I felt so much lighter and better afterwards. And so Dr. Nieters, I was cured at that point of Chinese herbal medicine of taking care of things in your body rather than doing the usual. And I hope I didn't cause any disturbance about the companies that I mentioned, but
No, I think you're fine.
okay, good.
Yeah.
But it really it was fast. It really felt healthy. I didn't feel any effect of it. So I'm just really I wanted the listeners to know that I was I wasn't a believer of Chinese herbal medicine. I didn't even know what effects it made. So from then on, if I've had anything, I've gone to Chinese herbal medicine acupuncturists who knew both. So that's one thing that you influenced me on.
Well, Phil, I'll tell you a story, kind of like yours, but I have one friend that I'd actually hired her to be a commercial real estate agent for me. So this is back early 1980s, and she was horrible at it. But she went into lending, and she was the best lender I've ever seen because she had no patience, none at all. And she would get loans turned around faster than anybody I've ever seen, but she didn't have the patience to do the
Mm.
long haul of being a commercial real estate agent. It can take years
Yes.
before things come to fruition. So anyway, I was at Reggae by the river, and she came up and said, "Hey, I want to introduce my," I can't remember how she said it, but it was like fiance. She was clear they were going to get married. And he looked bad. He was kind of green and just kind of, not going well. And she said, "Yeah, he's got a stomach ache. It's really bothering him." And I said, "Well, do you want me to help?" And he said, he was a total non-believer, right? General
Right.
contractor, you put the nail here, right? And so I said, "I don't mind trying to help you." So he's standing there, and I reach down on his legs, and there's a classic stomach point down there called Zusan Lee, and I pressed really hard on that and massaged it. He got the funniest look on his face, went over in the bushes and threw up.
Oh my gosh.
And
Yeah.
then he came back and said, "That was too weird." And I said, "How do you feel?" He said, "I feel fine."
Yeah.
So we became friends.
Yeah, it's great. Really great. I think there's a whole world of an opportunity for people to look at besides, and there's nothing wrong. That's what I love about you, Dr. Nieters, that you don't make traditional medicine wrong that in the hospitals, you have it be more of a partnership depending on what the case
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, no,
And
I've had my life saved by Western medicine.
right,
I've had my life saved by traditional Chinese medicine, right? I would guess that, well, most of my family members, had medical treatments that prolonged their lives, right? So,
right,
you know, they each have their own strengths and their own weaknesses. I mean, one of the beauties of Western medicine is when you go to a cardiologist, they've had 10 years at least of intense training. The problem is they're looking through a very small window, and so they don't see anything outside of that. It's like cholesterol, right? Well, the cholesterol levels that you see were set by doctors who were trying to prevent cardiovascular problems, okay? And even then, the ones for women are off. They're much they did tests they studied men and women. They didn't like the women's results, so they applied the men's results to women, right? Is pretty much what happened. But for strictly cardiovascular levels of health, then the ranges that you see published are relatively accurate. But when you look at overall mortality, death from cancer, from infection, from all these other illnesses, the sweet spot for women, postmenopausal women, is around 235. But doctors are trying to get them under that 200 level. Now, if you're a cardiologist and someone has a heart problem, that can be good. But for the general population, more people are going to die. And so for me, I base a lot of my decisions on mortality curves, not so with traditional Chinese medicine, but our books, The Sweet Spot and The Sweet Spot 2. I looked at hundreds and hundreds of research studies and found the ones that were very clear, had the best graphs, and that's what the sweet spot is. So on any mortality curve, almost all of them are U-shaped. Some of them are J-shaped, but most are U-shaped. And the very bottom of the curve is where you're going to find the lowest mortality risk. And if you go up or down, you're going to have a higher mortality risk, right?
Wow.
And so that's what we base that on is you want to be healthy? Do you want to live a healthy, long life? Then you should stay in the sweet spot. Now, what MDs are doing is seeing if you need to go into the hospital, basically, and
Mm,
if you're outside of the ranges that they're using, then okay, that's fine. You may need an intervention, right? So it's like picking the best spot. And that, Phil, that's why I do now several times a week, I do discovery calls where people can call and just pick my brain for 15 minutes for free. Because a
great.
lot of times they don't know where to ask, or what to ask. I mean, this isn't generally something that comes up, but for example, if someone has a urinary tract infection and it burns when they pee, I'll treat them. If it's kind of moved to their bladder, I'll treat them. If it moves to the kidneys, they're going in for emergency treatment because that can kill you, right?
Right.
And so do the antibiotics, do them exactly as they indicate, and then we'll clean you up afterwards, right?
Right.
And so it's kind of knowing, when you need to refer out.
Right. Well, how do they get to these question shows, the discovery?
Uh, yeah, go to alamedaacupuncture.com and there will be a box to click for a discovery call. And then schedule, the calendar will come up. And, I do like about 4 a week typically. And I like it because I get to meet new people. And sometimes I tell them, you should come see me or another acupuncturist. And sometimes I tell them, you should go see a cardiologist for that. Right. And so it just gives them a place to start.
That's great. Yeah, I'll put that link on when I post the podcast. So when they read the bio of you and that, I'll put that on there so people can click on the link.
Well, thank you, Phil. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
And the books, The Sweet Spot and Sweet Spot 2, where do people purchase those
Those are on
books?
Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah, those are on Amazon. I'm working on a third book right now, and the working title is Never, Ever, Ever Give Up. And that's based upon my adventure in December of 2023. Time's a little hard. This is kind of a typical example, I'm going to say. So I've had atrial fibrillation, missed heartbeats
Mhm.
since about the 1985. And I was able to control it with Chinese medicine really well. Then it got to a point where I just had massive stress in a very short period of time, and I couldn't control it so well. And so, and I actually took a medication for a while. It didn't really help much. But then I was in Trader Joe's. Catherine and I stopped on the way home, and I passed out. And I gotta give credit to my many years of martial arts training. Apparently, it looked pretty funny because I went completely unconscious, but I rode the shopping cart down kind of in slow motion and didn't hurt myself at all. I only knew there was something wrong when I looked right in front of me is a jar of hummus, and I knew that didn't belong there, right? So I, being a child of the 60s, when if you got hurt in a football game, it didn't matter.
Right.
You'd go to this, you get your bell rung, you go to the sideline, and the trainer, who I don't think had any training experience, would say, "How many fingers am I holding up?" And he'd hold up 4, and I go, 2. And he'd say, "Okay, who's the president?" And I go, "Abraham Lincoln." He'd go, "Oh, you're fine. Get back in the game," right? So that's my training in life. So I popped up and I was ready to leave, and they said, "No, no, we've called the ambulance. You need to go in." So they took me to Little Alameda Hospital here, which is usually not very busy, but this was crazy. There was one doctor on duty, and he looked like a deer in the headlights. There were 11 rooms that were occupied. I was sitting in the hallway, and someone else was sitting in the hallway, and the only thing that saved him was this ancient powerhouse of a nurse that would come over, take him by the arm, literally, and take him to a room. Say, "This is probably a stroke. I'll come get you in 10 minutes." And she would. She'd go drag him out of that room and move him somewhere else because he had 11 rooms going, right? So, they did what they should do. They, did film studies of my brain to make sure I didn't have a bleed. And they did an EKG to check on my heartbeat. And I'm there for about an hour, and this young physician's assistant comes up to the doctor and she shows him the strip from an EKG. And they look at it, and they both looked up at me. He said, "Okay, I guess that one's about me." And he looked at her and he shook his head. I said, "Oh, I guess I'm okay then." So I get my medical records 2 days later. I was in atrial flutter. That's where your heart is beating so badly. My upper chambers of my heart, the atria, were beating at 288 beats a minute, and my
Wow.
ventricles were beating at 72 beats a minute, so 4 to 1. And, I know he didn't have a lot of time, but someone could have said, "Excuse me, sir, we found a little irregularity in your EKG. You should go see a cardiologist." I mean, that's a 30-second conversation, right?
Right.
They didn't say a word. I saw it, scheduled with my cardiologist, a brilliant guy, wonderful guy. He scheduled a catheter ablation. That's where they put a wire up through your groin up into your heart. And what
Yes.
happens with atrial flutter, you have cells producing electric signals that shouldn't. It's like a bad distributor on an old car, right?
Right.
And so it took him a long time. I think there was a lot more going on than he realized. I was under anesthetic for a very long time, which is not good for older people. They sent me home the same night. I'm fine. Next day, I'm watching a movie with my son and my wife. Johnny was home for Christmas vacation, and suddenly I'm having trouble breathing, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Now, I didn't want to go back to the ER, but it finally got to the point where, "Honey, take me to Summit," which is a much better cardiology unit.
Right.
And so she drove me. And Phil, you're a great musician. You'll maybe appreciate this. A lot of people don't know who Warren Zevon is. And,
Yeah.
he wrote a lot of stuff for people in the 70s and 80s, and I loved his music. But when he found out he was going to die, he got a lot of his buddies in there, Bruce Springsteen and all these
Right.
people. And he did his last album. And one of the songs on it, I couldn't stop singing on the way to the hospital. I was trying to sing it under my breath, but it's like, "The shadows are falling and I'm running out of breath.
Right.
Keep me in your heart for a while." And that I couldn't get it out of my head, right? So I get there, they said that I had pneumonia because my lungs had collapsed and congestive heart failure, which in a 72-year-old is not a good thing. So they put me in there. They gave me great medical care. I was only in there for 4 days, and I recovered, and then they said, "Okay, you're good." And I said, "And? What should I do?" "Well, you might wanna check in with your cardiologist," but they didn't give me any orders of any kind. So
Huh.
I went home and ran all the cardiac testing that I knew they should have done, and sure enough, I would have been back in the hospital within a couple weeks because I had so many things out of balance, so much inflammation in my heart. So I took care of that, and I was okay. But while I'm lying in my hospital bed, and you're a master of vision and intention. And
Yeah.
so as I'm lying there, it's like, whoa, I haven't fulfilled my purpose. You
Yes.
know, I can't die right now. I
Yes.
got things to do. I said, and then it all came clear that I'd been neglecting my health, which is what got me into this situation. And so
Right.
I made a promise, created the intention that I was going to completely change my health within 120 days. So I started going to the gym in the morning. And so it's great because Catherine lives about a quarter of a mile from me, and she walks her dog over, and her dog will stay with our dogs, and then we'll go to the gym and then to work. And so I said, "Catherine, I really need to work out. Will you come too?" And she said, "Yeah, okay." So we started going to the gym 5 days a week, and Phil was a slog. My God, every day. But then I kept digging deeper and deeper into new exercise routines. I started getting Arnold Schwarzenegger's weekly blog, which is
Right.
actually pretty funny, by the way. He
Yes.
has great research articles. And so then I started going back into what I know about Chinese herbal medicine. And I knew I needed to greatly increase my testosterone levels. And so I came up with a very specific supplement regimen to get my testosterone levels up and my growth hormone levels up. And I think I was doing a total of about 15 exercises. I would split them up into upper body and lower body. And in 14 of the 15 exercises, I doubled my strength in 4 months. I mean, when I started, I could barely get out of a chair. My thighs were so weak, and so it completely turned it around in that 4 months. So since then, I've been Sunday mornings is when I make my food for the week, and I get everything together, and so I don't have to make that choice on the morning. And one word that had always bothered me my entire life, and I don't know why it bothered me, but it did, was the word discipline. I
Yep.
just didn't like that word. And so what I do is I have a ritual, right? And I'm okay with a
Good.
ritual, right?
Good.
And what I found as I get older is that my energy goes down substantially at the end of the day, which I
Good.
used to consider myself a night person, but now I'm up at 4 in the morning, get my research out of the way, get all my stuff done, go to the gym, go see patients, but I'm done by 2 o'clock.
Yep.
And so my life works so much better. I mean,
Good.
it's just amazing. So
That is excellent. And let's see, in March you're going to be, or May.
75.
March you're going to be 75. I'll be
Yeah.
75 in August, so we're
You're
the
a
same
youngster.
year. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it's so great because I really associate with everything you said, and I started working out as well at we have a fitness center nearby, so I go there, and but it requires that kind of focus. We are not those young kids that we were,
Yeah.
and it. I found that it was a lot of my own past images of myself that I had that I should be going on, 4 hours sleep,
Oh
because
my God. Yeah.
yeah. And now I can actually take a nap in the afternoon and not have to worry about it, and, or I take about a half hour nap, which energizes me towards the evening. But
Wow, Phil, we are so on parallel courses. I will get home, feed the dogs. I do most of the cooking, so I'll kind of prep something,
yeah,
and then I'll take a nap, and then when Jenny and Johnny get home, I just pop it in the oven, right? And so and then I'm awake enough that I can actually have conversations with them, right?
yeah,
Do
right.
whatever we're gonna do. And so it's, finding out what works for us, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember I still tell Phil Cisneros stories
that's
all
right.
the time. Now, a couple of them are probably too crude to put on the air, but
Right.
there was one, and I'd come home, and this one I had the real estate company. Oh, no, this was when I was already doing acupuncture, but I'd come home and I'd have a to-do list, right? And I'd get home and it's like, Phil, I had 20 items and I only got 4 of them done. I only got 4 of them done. What's wrong with me? And you said, you need a mantra. And I said, Phil, I do not need a darn mantra. I got plenty of mantras. And he said, no. And you said, no, you need a mantra. Sit down. And you took me through some breathing exercises. He said, okay, now in front of you, you've got your list. And this is what you say. Fit. You said a little more bluntly, I
Yes.
did what I did and I didn't do what I didn't do, and it's good enough. I'm telling you, that changed my life. That was the end of the list. And then I did a weekend workshop with you. And so and there are things that we know, but we don't really know, right? We don't
Right.
really put them to use. And I did a weekend workshop with you, and I still have my I'm never doing lists. You've got
Good.
all these things, and so I don't keep to-do lists anymore. I plug things into my calendar. If they're not that important, I'm not doing them now,
Right.
or I'm never doing them. And one of the best I'm never doing it was I had been thinking about going back to law school. And because I'd seen some just horrific stuff where people were getting censored about health things, and it's like, darn it, I'm gonna go back to law school. And so it was kinda lingering right over here. And then after that weekend, it's like, I'm never doing law school.
Right.
So, there's no energy leakage. It's not leaking everywhere. So, I wanna thank you for those things.
Well, it's also that you don't hold that like an extra weight on your shoulders.
Oh,
Like, when am I going to do the law school thing? When am I going to do that
yeah.
nagging voice? When you put in never doing now, it takes it out of existence for your daily work.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's great. I'm so glad that that really made that impact. And I still use that mantra for myself. I did what I did today, and I didn't do what I didn't do, and that's the way it is. Thank you and good night.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And, I still use those as examples for my patients. They'll be going through the same things, and I'll say, "Okay, now this is very special, but I'm gonna share my mantra with you." And they look
Great.
at me, and then I tell them what it is, and every time they laugh. And for a lot of them, it is actually a game changer.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, are you doing any more Tai Chi classes? Are you
I
teaching
have
Tai
not
Chi?
been. It got too nighttime oriented
Uh-huh.
because I wasn't going to teach enough that I wanted to have my own studio, but every place I wanted to teach, the popular times were always taken, like, 5 to 9 in the evening and etc. So I would end up teaching like late on Sundays or, 9 to 10:30 on a Tuesday and Thursday. And so I stopped doing that. And it's kind of sad because I don't teach as much, I don't practice as much. In fact,
Right.
I woke up in the middle of the night last night, which is kind of rare, but I'd gone to bed pretty early, and I started watching some Tai Chi videos that people had done and thinking, I need to start doing more Tai Chi,
Right.
because it just feels so wonderful to do that.
Yeah, I've been looking at Tai Chi. I, as you know, live in Santa Cruz and plenty
You
of
know,
Tai Chi classes around here.
I interviewed a retired medical doctor a couple weeks ago, and she specializes in helping postmenopausal women. And I said, "So," and she's had talked about a lot of things. And I said, "So if you could just give one bit of advice that's most important, what would it be?" She said, "Avoid frailty.
Ah,
Avoid frailty.
right.
Exercise, particularly weight training,
Yes,
right, to avoid that." So that was okay, pretty
that's
cool.
excellent. Well, Dr. Nieters, I'm just so glad that we got to get together and know more about what you're up to these days. Anything you want to share with people before we end our interview here?
I keep most of my podcasts, there's sometimes exceptions, but mostly they're about 15 minutes just to give people like a idea of something. Like we did one taken from a research study and it was titled How to Prevent Female Heart Attacks 30 Years in Advance. And they've been studying and found out that by running 3 tests, you can actually figure out the likelihood of female heart attacks 30 years in advance. And it's way, way, way more than cholesterol, but doctors don't do it. One of the tests, which is low density lipoprotein, most all doctors will order. But the key is lipoprotein A, which is a subfraction and is not treatable by statins at all. And so I think that's why doctors don't order it. It's like, I can't fix it anyway, so why order it? And then high sensitivity, sometimes called cardiac C-reactive protein. And that tells you if you have inflammation in your heart and arteries. So if you have that lipoprotein A and you have inflammation in your heart and arteries, you're going to form a lot of arterial plaques. If you don't have inflammation, you're probably okay. So anyway, I did a little short podcast on that because I think it's so critical.
Right. And people can listen to these podcasts on, are they on different platforms like
Uh, it-
Spotify,
the,
iTunes, or
Yes, it's on everything. I'm doing them
okay,
through, an organization called Doctor Talks, DR Talks, but it's also on our main site, which is The Balancing Point.
okay, great. And also people can find you on Facebook and other social media places as well.
Absolutely.
What I love is on Facebook, I get to see Dr. Nieters in his little clips, every time. And Catherine, I don't know if you have anything to do with that, but man, you're doing a great job of promotion and
Yeah, I don't. All I do
okay.
is talk, Phil.
Yeah, right. And
Someone
that's
else is
right.
putting all the
Great to have a
cool stuff
person like
together.
Catherine.
Yeah,
It's great to
exactly.
have that kind of
Yeah, Catherine's
prom
the brains of the outfit.
that's great. And that was one of my I want to share this with you. I saw so much of you being out there in the public because of your experiences and your wisdom and your knowledge that would open up people to, this whole new world of Chinese herbal medicine and acupuncture and different treatments. And but that kind of person needs a support team. You know, you really do need people who are managing the office, managing appointments, managing the marketing, promotion, and you have built this. You have done a great job of building that, and which allows you to go home at 2. You
Yeah.
know, you know.
A great book that I read. And again, you know things, but sometimes you just don't really get it. And I read a book called Buy Back Your Time. And this guy talks about, you probably read it, you've read everything like that, but, about, do what you're best at. Hire someone else to do the other stuff, but do what only you can do or that you're really good at. And I really, and when I got really sick, I really took that to heart.
Right, good.
Yeah.
Good. I think that's it also comes with the age as well, because we start going, I'm not doing that anymore. Give it to a young person with a lot of energy, you know.
Yeah.
And I have assistants that help me every once in a while with different things. I even have people every once in a while when I'm forgetting the name of a book, movie, etc., and I go call them up and say, "Hey, listen, I can't remember the name of that movie where such and such happened, such and such." They become my memory restorer.
Oh my God. When it comes to medical things, because we do so many tests and we do so many supplements, and sometimes those will slip, right? Or a patient, it's like, God, what was her name? And so Catherine is the brains for that. For any other things, like if I want to know when I got married, or if I want to know
Yeah,
when my
right.
wife's birthday is, right? That's Debbie at the front desk, right?
Yep. That's
Or
great.
the name of a movie, because she knows everything like that.
That's fantastic. And your
Yeah.
office is the same office in Alameda? Is that, or did you move?
I think we're not on Lincoln. I think you were at Lincoln. We're right across from the city hall now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the one where you park in the back.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I've
Yeah.
been in that office. So
And we love it
yes.
here because it's so much quieter than where we were before.
Right. Right. And I remember the painting in the background. So that's,
Oh, cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
So really great and peaceful. Dr. Nieters, thank you so much. And I hope that people listening take advantage of the different places where they can hear you, even if you're in the Bay Area, or, if you want to travel and go to the Bay Area and make an appointment. I highly recommend it. It would be worth it, and for your own health and those of you around you who would benefit from you being healthy,
Yeah.
that you take a visit to Dr. Nieters' office at Alameda Acupuncture. Wonderful to be with you.
Phil, this has been such a treat for me. I remember why I love you so much, right?
Yeah. Well, we bring out the best of each other, and I
Yeah.
think that's what's great. And I really appreciate you, Dr. Nieters, and I
Righty.
look forward to seeing you soon in person.
Okay, Phil. Thank you. Likewise. You take
Okay.
care.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me on The Balancing Point. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow the show, share it with a friend, and leave a review. Feeling out of balance? Most approaches just manage symptoms. Here, we get to the root. So real healing, real clarity, and balance can begin. Visit AlamedaAcupuncture.com. That's AlamedaAcupuncture.com to learn more, explore our supplements, or book a call. We'd love to hear from you.